Hi, friends. Welcome to Embracing Your Season. I'm your host, Paige Klingenfield. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am at the AACC National Conference in Dallas, Texas. So if you hear people talking in the background, you realize that we are living the best life with all the Christian counselors in the United States. Today, I have a wonderful guest joining me. His name is Dr. Gregg Jantz. Dr. Jantz is a certified eating disorder specialist, certified chemical dependency counselor, a nationally certified psychologist, and licensed mental health counselor. He is the author of 40 books. Dr. Jantz is also the founder of The Center, a place of hope. You can find more information about that in our show notes. He brings a message of hope and healing to audiences through seminars, conferences, and the media. You can also find his appearances on Dr. Phil, CNN, Fox, ABC, and NBC. So stay tuned to after my conversation with Dr. Jantz for some of my takeaways from our conversation. Let's get started now with my conversation with Dr. Gregg Jantz on this edition of Embracing Your Season. So we are at the AACC conference, and with me is Dr. Gregg Jantz. Thanks so much for joining me here today.
Oh, good to be with you, and it's really good to be here.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I love being at this conference. I love that we're supporting and encouraging all the Christian counselors that are out there, so we're equipping them. And so I feel like our sessions, our podcasts are actually equipping those with free counseling, right?
Good,
so
let's
we
do
get to
that.
exactly.
Let's do it.
Today is going to be a fun conversation about toxic people.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about what defines a toxic person.
Just that word toxic.
I know.
What do you think of? A toxic waste dump? What do we think of? Toxic is a word that it's a little cringy, and you think, okay, toxic people. Who's that? What is that? Well, we might use the term gaslighting and people that devalue you. We might be saying emotional abuse, people that put you down. There could be passive-aggressive behavior, people that smile at you, but behind the scenes, they're starting a gossiping about you. So toxic people come in different forms. Another form might be just manipulation. A toxic person, ultimately, if you look at it, it's all about power and control over another person. So there you go, toxic people. And by the way, we all know somebody that in our life that feels toxic. Sometimes we don't know what to do with them. And the big challenge is, what if we live with them? So
different level.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Have you noticed that a lot of people are using the words like narcissism or narcissist pretty frequently, even flippantly, just tossing the name around, even though diagnostically obviously doesn't correlate with their behaviors. But what do you think is the increase in people using language like that to identify maybe toxic people in our society?
Yes, we're hearing more about narcissism, a narcissistic personality disorder, which I'm going to say is real, but sometimes a person just has really poor coping mechanisms. They're very manipulative. They're very, very controlling. And we like to label them, go, they're narcissistic because it's all about them. Now, there is a true narcissistic disorder, and that does exist. By and large, we could probably say a toxic person has narcissistic traits because they make everything about them. A narcissistic person has very, what I'll call, low ego strength. Their self-esteem is really, truly low, and they feel a sense of value. If I can control and manipulate you, that's how I feel value. So it's really distorted. Mm-hmm. Now, usually if you look at a toxic person, something really has happened in their life. Significant trauma, abuse, but something has happened in their life. And here we are. They're exhibiting all their hurt through really destructive means. So, and they may not even realize it, how absolute destructive they are. Two kinds of toxic people. Those that, that's just my way of coping, and then there's others that have more malicious intent. Okay, a true narcissistic personality could have malicious intent. They are deliberately, on purpose, having strategies to hurt and harm you. It almost feels evil. So we got to be careful, because some people are just toxic because they've been really, really hurt.
Mm-hmm. And don't you agree that sometimes it really helps to know that background to offer more grace to the way that they've learned to cope with their environment around them? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Interesting. So with past trauma informing how toxic people are, if that, as you said, is a marriage relationship, how do people navigate that?
Yeah, if you're in a marriage relationship and it feels toxic, I really think, obviously, we need to go and get some good help. Okay. And though the toxic person that's about power and control, they probably do not want to come along and do any kind of counseling or marital. They know, and they might even tell you, you go ahead because it's all your problem. I would say, go ahead, start the process, because you're going to need to learn, how am I going to cope with this? And there is a line that's crossed that I have to make some decisions. A person that is toxic, who's trying to take everything away from you, and finances, or and control you, and there could be a lot of abuse that ultimately you have to step outside of that, maybe even to get that person's attention in order for there to be help. So
Yeah. So you kind of mentioned in that statement about boundaries, setting up boundaries, especially with someone that is
Sure.
unhealthy or manipulative. What are some ways that someone can integrate some healthy boundaries to maintain the relationship, if that's their goal, to stay in relationship with that person?
yeah, what does that look like? Healthy boundaries. Sometimes, and that's one that takes a lot of practice. You may say, well, I've got boundaries, and sometimes we can use it in a way that we're kind of joining in the fight because we're misappropriating boundaries. A healthy boundary may mean that you're not going to participate in a conversation at some point. A healthy boundary may go, if the person's calling you names or doing things that are inappropriate, you have to step aside. Maybe I'm even leaving the room. But so often we want to defend ourselves. So often we want to just continue in a conversation. There's times where we need to pull ourselves out and just refuse to participate. I'm no longer going to be able to talk with you right now. Maybe we can revisit this later. Pulling yourself out.
Wow. Yeah. I think for some people, they stay in those relationships because they think that they have to, whether it's because they're in a marriage relationships, and they don't always recognize that actually setting a boundary is loving themselves and
Sure.
loving their spouse well. I think the other thing that you even mentioned earlier regarding just this is the way that they learned how to cope. Maybe no one has ever expressed to them that this is an unhealthy coping mechanism, that this is actually impacting their relationships, and that people aren't loving people well unless they speak that truth and
Right.
ask accountability, right?
Right.
Yeah. So let's talk about for those that need to possibly leave the relationship because it is so unhealthy. What are some recommendations to help them walk away from toxic
Well, I
people?
wouldn't do that alone. I would do that with advice, with wisdom. I would make sure I have a plan. Sometimes we go, I've had enough, and we're reacting to everything, and I'm leaving, I'm gone. Well, let's have a better plan than that, and understand even under what conditions would you return. Under what conditions? If I need to separate myself from a person, that does not necessarily mean it's a permanent situation. It may, but it may take that in order for another person to get some help. So when the target of all that abuse is not there, it can really be an eye-opener. So, yeah. So I'm a big advocate of get a good Christian counselor and have somebody that's walking alongside you. But always make sure there's a plan. You can run and leave out of anger, but without a plan, things could get worse.
Yeah.
So,
What would some of those action plan or next steps look like?
sure. Well, if I go, this environment is so unhealthy and it's abusive, then where am I going to go? Under what conditions do I come back? And also, there's the basics. Are there kids involved? Do I need to have provision financially? What do I need to have in order for me to take, if you will, a timeout? Initially, see it as a timeout. I'm pulling away from the situation, and even so that you can think clearer and decide what you need to do. And I know sometimes when we talk about a toxic person, sometimes we think about, oh, it's the guy, he's controlling everything. But this could be not just the guy. This could be the female, male, both can be toxic people.
Right. Yeah. That's the dilemma, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's interesting for those that maybe they have a friendship, for instance, that is toxic, that they've had this friend forever,
Yes.
since they were young. And so they're maintaining only because of the longevity of the relationship.
Yeah.
So walk people through identifying toxic traits in relationships where maybe they need to walk away, or just identify, obviously, that it's not healthy.
Well, if you're so devalued and no matter what you do, you get a situation where it's so negative, no matter what you do, there's a put down, that's a good sign. There's times where if you're being controlled by money, that's another big one, huge one. So look at the way, and maybe you need to make a list, but make a list of the ways that I am being controlled, the ways that I am being manipulated. Just lay it out and start to look at it. Sometimes it's through words that another person's saying, sometimes it's through actions. So the manipulation sometimes is covert, and then there's overt. It's like always a threat that maybe I'm going to be hit. A toxic person can go right to the edge of domestic violence, but they never hit you, and you go, well, I can't leave. I've never been hit. So the manipulation is really strong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a wide range. And I think people have different ideas of what manipulation is. Can you also explain some 10 signs? You speak about 10 signs of manipulation or being manipulated. What are a few of those you could share?
Well, first of all, I would say, you're being manipulated. You're going to feel it. Okay, something's going to really feel off. So, and we do talk, by the way, the Toxic People book. When you're in this situation, you don't need anything really heavy to read. You need quick you need quick answers. We did all this in like 100 some pages because your concentration's probably not great. You're always looking over your back, and you're afraid to even hold a book that says Toxic People.
Right, because they can see.
No,
yes.
I'm just saying. Yeah. And so that's why it's a smaller book. You can hide it. But a sign that you're being manipulated may also be that I have to hide things. I can't share my emotions. I can't share about my day because everything is criticized. So I'm living in an very oppressive environment. Those are just a few of the ways that you can. And I put together, it's really quite good on the website, I put together a toxic person. It's kind of a quiz or a test, and you can take it. It's free. It's confidential. But it kind of gives you a score and a range of, well, how serious is this situation?
Yeah.
Because sometimes we need to do a little self-assessment.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes if we've been in a toxic relationship, we actually end up making excuses for the other person, denying how bad it really is. We feel trapped at times.
Mm-hmm.
So... And sometimes we'll say, well, I'll just pick on the guy for a minute. That's the way he's always been. That's just the way he is. So no changing anything here. But you're really being mistreated. So we've got to tell ourselves the truth.
Mm-hmm. So it makes me think of like how important it is how we raise our kids to first recognize healthy boundaries.
Yeah, and what is a healthy relationship?
Yes, exactly. So we have to be speaking that life over our kids and teaching them that.
Yes.
But if we don't do that, so say like, for instance, me growing up, I grew up in a dysfunctional household. And so that became the precursor to the way that I evaluated my relationships. Therefore, allowing people to cross over my boundaries or not treat me the way that I deserve because that was my mentality. Therefore, I started obviously counseling myself by reading all these amazing books out there that are on these topics, which is awesome, and having community. I had my own therapist.
Yep.
All of that was helping me recognize, because we're stuck in our own filters of our perspective, right, from our childhood. And so, again, let's just reiterate the fact that how we're raising our kids and pouring life over them is so important. So give some parents some advice on how do you help your kids recognize healthy relationships?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we need to recognize is a healthy relationship, you will not feel devalued. You will not, sometimes you'll feel younger. If you're around a person that's full of a lot of put downs and controlling, sometimes you feel like you shrink a little bit and you feel like a kid. You feel younger.
Interesting,
and you feel, so the question is, do I feel powerless? Do I feel like my personal power is being robbed from me when I'm around this person? Do I always feel like I have to do what they want to do in order for things to go okay? But we also know when we're with the person that's healthy, you're going to probably see a lot of gratitude. You're going to see thankfulness. You're going to see optimism. A healthy person, you can count on them to tell you the truth, and you know their intent is not to hurt you. We need 3 to 5 people like that in our lives, by the way. We need close friends. Use the word community. Yeah, we need that. We need those that really we know that they're there for us, and we know that they know the truth and that they will tell us the truth.
I wonder if people also get confused, however, of truth speaking, right? The difference between someone telling you something out of love, sharing truth out of love, or if that's just a put down. How can you distinguish between the two?
Oh, a put down probably has the intent to cause harm. A put down has, if somebody, it can sometimes be subtle, like, a parent might say, well, why can't you be like your sister? Look at her.
Ooh, yeah.
And so you're setting up a comparison. That's a put down, and that's saying you're not good enough.
Yeah. So telling the difference between telling someone constructively maybe that they're seeing something that is maybe a harmful behavior as opposed to calling out something that's maybe shame-based.
Absolutely. And we would always say, I have something important to share with you. Would that be all right? You kind of paving the way, you're asking for permission, and it really feels like the care comes across. Yeah, I love you so much. I just feel like I need to talk to you about some things I'm feeling. Would that be all right? So set up the premise that this is not about hurting you.
Yeah, that's good. And I think, again, as you said, it's modeling for our kids how to have healthy dialogue, sharing truth, but with the intentionality of growing and loving well, which is great.
And we need to teach them forgiveness.
Ooh, yeah. Speak a little bit more about that.
Well, one of the signs of a healthy person is they're an initiator of forgiveness. You will see that they're not easily taking up offenses. A healthy person will probably be the first, I say initiator, they're probably the first one to say, I'm sorry, will you please forgive me? And they probably have a lot of gratitude in their life. A forgiving person is a grateful person. So they're just not going around taking up offenses, which a toxic person is easily offended.
Yeah.
So
That's so good. Forgiving is a gratefulness. I love that. So let's speak a little bit about our culture. Right now, we're obviously going in a political season where it seems like there's a lot of toxicity.
Sure.
How do we have grace for this toxic season in our culture? And then how do we navigate it well with our families?
Yeah. There's something called great grace. And we need to be, yes, because there's going to be a lot of differences of opinions. There's a lot of division. And there's a lot of, well, if you don't believe as I do politically, then something's wrong with you. So there's a lot of, use the word shame earlier, there's a lot of shame that goes with this. So, but you know what? I would set that aside, and the Lord loves us all, and sometimes a person needs to know how much you care about them first before they're going to receive any other information. So if I just say, make politics the first and only point of connection, I got to have other points of connection. So, like I have people that I know probably would disagree with me, but you know what? They're going to know how much I care about them.
That's beautiful.
That doesn't change.
Yeah, that's really good. Well, I would love for people to get a hold of your book as well as your resources. Where can they reach out to you? And
well,
get that
this is
information?
our 40th year at the center, A Place of Hope. So it's simple, aplaceofhope.com. Take that. That's where you'll find the little mental health test and the one related to toxic people. So take that one, aplaceofhope.com.
Dr. Jantz, thanks so much for researching this first and foremost, because we can all relate to having a toxic person in our life.
Can.
So thank you so much.
We have one or two in our lives.
Don't we now? Isn't that interesting? Maybe we should
And sometimes it is a family member.
Yes, unfortunately. That makes it a little harder, doesn't it?
Yep.
But we won't mention them by name, so we will just love them with the grace and be forgiving of all things. So again, thanks so much for your time. We appreciate all that you do.
You're very welcome.
Friends, I hope that you enjoyed the conversation with Dr. Gregg Jantz. I know I love the conversation about toxic people. I mean, we all have people in our lives that have some toxicity. In fact, let's be honest, we probably have some toxicity in ourselves as well. But being able to navigate some of these relationships, it could become hard, it could become daunting. And so having someone that is like Dr. Gregg Jantz telling us how to navigate this actually equips us to be smarter in our relationships. It helps to give us tools as well as ways to cope with some of these interactions that might be unhealthy. So, some of my takeaways today hopefully can help you navigate the world of toxic people, but being mindful that not everyone that is a toxic individual has necessarily narcissism. I know that we've heard that word thrown around a lot. I love it that people in society now have all these diagnostic language like depression and anxiety and narcissism. But what ends up happening is that we're using them in contexts that are not appropriate. So it turns these real life mental health disorders into something that is not valued as much or invalid due to the fact we're using it in such a casual way. So be mindful that if you do have someone that's difficult in your life, they may not necessarily be narcissistic as a whole, but they definitely might have traits. This is why it's important to start talking to maybe a professional counselor, someone that knows some of the inner workings of maybe a narcissist, or more importantly, where we have more commonly the toxic people in our lives, how to navigate that. Also, just surrounding yourself with people that are telling you truth, that see things that maybe you can't see, that can offer you a filter and a perspective that maybe you weren't even aware that you were around people that were causing some of this harm and invalidating your feelings, as well as many other things that causes stress in our own lives due to our relational interactions. So let's get into a little bit of the takeaways that Dr. Gregg gives us today. Some of the insights that I have is, how do you determine the toxic person? What are some of the giveaways or the flags that you might have? This is particularly hard when you've been in a relationship with an individual for many years. Sometimes it's easy to look past the transgressions because you're just saying, well, it's just who they are. But when we start doing that, we start minimizing our own reactions. We start thinking that we aren't worth having positive interactions with this individual. In fact, that could be even rooted from our childhood, the way that we were treated back then, because the way that we were treated by our parents absolutely informs the way that we feel like we deserve to be treated today. Now, if that's you and you've experienced some hardship growing up in your childhood that has impacted your daily life today, absolutely find someone that can speak truth and guide you through the healing process. Because whatever words were spoken over you, whether as a child, middle schooler, high school, or even in college age, does not always identify who you truly are. Our identity is not wrapped up in the words and the way that people saw us. Instead, our identity is already firm because we are children of God. But let's talk a little bit about what Gregg points out in terms of identifying a toxic person, especially if you're unaware that maybe some of the behavioral interactions are not healthy. I love when he starts talking about how that person makes you feel. Now, it's hard in the moment to think about, how am I feeling about this interaction? But he points out that when you take a moment and you pause as you are in a conversation with these individuals, do they make you feel younger? I know that I've had some experience with this where I feel like I'm in this conversation with this individual. I respect them highly. And then all of a sudden, I feel like I'm incompetent. I'm stupid. I'm not good enough to be in this situation because of the words that they're saying. But actually, the undertones, the way that they're treating me, that sometimes is indicative of toxic interactions. So if you start feeling like they're speaking criticism, they're invalidating you, they're rationalizing their own behavior, even though you've pointed out that the behavior is hurtful, that could be some really good indicators that these are not great people to be around. I also like to point out, how does your body respond? This is what I talk to kids about oftentimes when they're trying to determine if a friend is a healthy friendship for them, because our bodies tend to speak louder than our words or our thoughts. So if you take again that pause, that moment to think, am I feeling tense? Am I developing headaches? Does my stomach hurt? Am I exhausted after being around these people? We call that, in a special fancy way in counselor language, psychosomatic symptomology. Basically, it just means your body is responding to fight or flight because your body recognizes this is not a safe, healthy situation. So for your kiddos, if you're starting to point out or notice that every time they hang out with certain friends, they're coming home with some of these symptoms of headaches, stomach aches, really tired, lethargic, and they're tense in their bodies, that could be indicative that their relationships that they're in are not healthy. What a great way to start that conversation of, what do you see friendship as? What is valued in friendships? And then pursuing a conversation of potentially walking away from the relationships that are not great for them. And of course, parents, we can model this as well. So if you have situations where you could potentially walk away from friendships, even if you've had them forever, but recognize they're not healthy for you, this could be a great place to start to model, even for your kids, and start developing healthier friendships in the future. I also appreciate Dr. Gregg's reminder for those relationships, whether it's with a spouse, a family member, or someone that you desire to have a healthy relationship with, that when we want to see change in them, we can't just come at them and demand the change. Instead, we must demonstrate care and attempt to connect with them. I mean, how many times has someone come at us and demanded that we change our behavior? Of course, we're going to put up a wall and be defensive. However, when we show them that we truly care and that we want this relationship, that almost sets that value system in a different direction so that they potentially can start seeing how their behaviors is impacting us in a negative way and truly threatens the sanctity of our relationship. This, of course, can be super hard, especially if this person has hurt us deeply. When we come to them with gentleness and compassion in our request, it produces a greater chance of them listening to us, as well as leading to behavioral changes in a really positive way. Now, my final takeaway is, once you identify a person is toxic, and if you can't avoid the interactions with them, so I'm talking about like coworkers or family members or people that you truly cannot end the relationship with, Dr. Gregg says you still have power in how you interact with them. So, for example, you do not always have to engage in some of these toxic conversations. You can choose to leave the conversation. Now, my suggestion, of course, is not just turning around and walking away, although sometimes that's absolutely practical and appropriate. Other times where you say, you know what, I'm not going to continue this conversation right now. In fact, can we come back and talk about this another time? Because I can't fully understand what you have to say when you're addressing me in this way. So you're indicating to this person that they're crossing your boundaries, that you're not appreciating the way the conversation is going, and that you need a timeout. You need a break. Sometimes that works. Sometimes the people come harder at you. At that point, absolutely turn your back and walk away, because it's not going to be a productive conversation. There's other times you can just leave the room. My producer, for instance, likes to talk about how when he's in certain gatherings with individuals that he knows cause tension for himself and his body, mind, and spirit, he comes up with an idea that maybe he needs to take a break from the situation. And so he goes into the room, realizes the people of tension are present, and he's like, okay, I am just at my limit. And instead of engaging in some of the toxic interactions that can happen, he just pieces out. He says, I'm going to just take a break. I'm going to take a walk. I'm going to go upstairs and I'm going to get on Facebook and scroll. And it allows him to decompress so that when he comes back into the room, he's actually able to engage in maybe more in better conversations with these individuals, which is such a great reminder, because friends, holidays are coming up. We know that sometimes family can be the hardest to interact with, and we want to engage in relationships, but sometimes in order to maintain the relationship, we also have to have separation and time out. So thank you so much again for listening to the show. If you have any feedback or guests you would like to see on the show, I would love to hear from you. You can contact me at pageklingandpeel@gmail.com. We have a lot of exciting interviews coming up, so be sure to tune in again next time for another edition of Embracing Your Season.